Hey, everybody. Welcome to June session of Men's Healing Matters. My name is Greg Mayo. I'm the Men's Healing Strategist at Support After Abortion. And this month, we are talking about a better you is a better dad. Now, before we get into it, I want to share a quote with you from Charles Kettering. And I want you to think about it because this quote is going to color what we talk about today. The quote is, "Every father should remember that one day his son will follow his example, not his advice." You can think my kids will do as I say, not as I do, right? But that's completely counterintuitive to how things work. They will follow your example. And we're going to talk about what that example might look like for you. But before we get into that, I want to recap a little bit about last month. We talked about men and mental health in the context of engaging men quickly and effectively in our centers. In the context of men and mental health, we talked about their perceptions of mental health care. We talked about how 70% of suicides are men, and that roughly turns out to be about one every 20 minutes. We talked about how men sometimes act out through alcohol or substance addiction, through overworking, through risky behaviors. But we also talked about how men want help, but they think nobody cares about their problems, their mental health problems. And so we talked about messaging. We talked about crafting our messages, our social media messages, our emails, the things we're doing to draw men. We talked about crafting those in a way that speaks to men, to how they receive information, how they learn, how they think, how they feel, how they share. And then we talked about why men aren't coming in and why they're not receiving the healing they need. Then we continued talking about how we need to grow and change to meet men where they're at. That means maybe changing some things we've assumed will be the way to go. And maybe we're doing that because it's not working, right? So we have to try something different. Now, before we go on, I just want to take a minute and I want to talk about where we've been so far this year with Men's Healing Matters. We had our first session in February together. So here's where we've been so far. We started off talking about our men's white paper and the research we did on the impact of abortion on men. Then we started talking about changing the way we talk about abortion. That was in March. Talk about how language matters and the way we talk about it can impact whether people will step forward into healing or not. We then talked about the male volunteer, who that male volunteer is and should be and what their role should be. And we talked about how to find the right guy. Like I said, last month we talked about engaging men quickly and effectively. Remember, you can access past videos, recaps of past webinars on our website. Go to the resource library in the Provider Training Center. So all that as a backdrop, right? We're all leading up to today, where we're talking about better you as a better dad. Men's Mental Health Month, which is June, and we're talking about Father's Day, which is coming up. So, a little bit of background. What is Father's Day? It started in 1910 in Spokane, Washington by Sonora Smart Dodd. See, her dad was a Civil War vet and a single dad who raised 6 kids by himself. She had heard a sermon on Mother's Day in 1908 and then went to her pastor and said, "We should have a day for dads too." And I think that's kind of cool. Another little note about Father's Day, the picture there, that's the number one gift fathers receive still is a tie. Not for my kids, because I have 3 ties that I've had for 20 years and they still work fine. But that's the number one gift. And something that's kind of funny, the number 2 holiday in the country is Mother's Day. The number 1 holiday in the US is Christmas. So you got Jesus, then you got your mama. Father's Day ranks number 20. So there are somehow 18 holidays between Mother's Day and Father's Day. Just a little context, do what you want with that. I heard a comedian talking about it and thought it was funny. Let's talk about some stats. There are about 72.2 million dads in the US today. That's over the age of 15. Of those 72 million, about 2 million of them are single dads with primary custody raising their children. There are 24 million US children that live in a father absent home. Now, This is an important stat, and this will actually inform some of what we're talking about today. And frankly, it's going to lead into what we're talking about in July during Men's Healing Matters. So I want you to remember that 24 million kids are in homes right now that are not led by their fathers. And just another little nugget to throw in here that I don't have on the slide. I want you to remember that 1 in 5 men will experience abortion loss by the time they're 45. I think we can all agree that dads play an important role in raising their children. At least we should be able to agree on that. Dr. Craig Garfield, MD, said there's a small but definitely growing body of literature on fathers that show that cognitively, children who have involved fathers have better linguistic abilities. They have higher academic readiness and ultimately higher academic achievement. Socio-emotionally, they have better coping skills, show more maturity and more pro-social behaviors, and have secure attachments. Take that quote and distill it down. Dads matter. You play an important role. Without dad, we have a whole litany of problems. You check every negative metric: school dropouts, violence, gun violence, poverty, unplanned pregnancy. You take all these stats and some more that we'll look at here in a minute. And what you see as they rise, they've risen roughly in the same trajectory as the rise in fatherlessness. If you're a dad, no, you're not perfect at it. None of us are, but you are important. Now, I want to talk about ugly money versus pretty money. What do I mean by that? Well, as a lot of you may know, I was in the home building and remodeling business for a couple decades. And so that's how I think of things. I was a realtor, have been a realtor for about a decade now on top of that. And so when I talk to investors, which I've done forever, we always have the conversation about where to spend the money. Do we spend it on the ugly money? What's the ugly money? The ugly money is stuff that the client may not see, that a potential buyer may not see, right? Foundation work, roof structure work, mechanicals, HVAC, electrical, things like that. It's money that needs to be spent to shore up the safety, frankly, and the health of the house and the inhabitants. But it's often money that's not seen. And then we have pretty money. This is the money that you see on HGTV shows, right? This is the new kitchen cabinets, the new paint, the vinyl plank flooring, all the stuff that shows up in the pictures on the listing. The difference is, while there's nothing wrong with spending the pretty money, if you don't spend the ugly money first, you don't have a structurally sound house. You don't have the best house you could. Better to spend the ugly money first and then do what you can with pretty money. I'll give you a great example. I went into a house to show a client several years ago that was listed as fully remodeled. Now I'm 6 foot tall. My client was 5'5", 5'6". And we had been in the house a few minutes and I said, "Oh, wait, we got some structural issues." And she said, "How do you know?" And I said, "Go stand over in that corner." And she was kitty corner across the living room from me. And I said, "Do you notice anything?" And she stood there for a second and she said, "We're the same height." I said, "Right. Because you're standing over the center beam of the house and we've got a problem." So we went and looked at it. And sure enough, the center beam, which was a 12-inch by 12-inch beam, was rotted all the way through. See, the people had put new cabinets in and new windows and new flooring and all this new pretty stuff, but they didn't take care of the foundational elements. With people, it's the same thing. We got to spend the ugly money, man. You want to get your hair colored, pretty contacts, you want to get a spray tan, wear a fancy suit, I don't know, whatever it is you want to do. You want to do all that, that's great. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you're doing that and not spending the ugly money, then you might have a problem. Now, let's look at how becoming a new father impacts men. And we have some stats on that you see here on the screen. 70% of men reported stress, lack of sleep, financial worries, and increased demands upon becoming a father. 56% of fathers said that they felt judged by their co-parents for their quality of parenting. They're co-parent, right? So they're still with the mother, they're not with the mother, they're still friends and co-parenting, they live together, whatever the case may be. What that means is literally the other parent. 56% of these men said they felt judged by him and that they weren't doing a good job in the other's eyes. 50%, a little more than, noticed a change in their health habits. So this is where we're talking about the ugly money, right? They're exercising less, they're drinking more, they're smoking more. About half said that they experienced pressure to be a good dad. Now, there's healthy pressure to be a good dad, right? You want to strive every day to be a better parent. I do. And my youngest kid's 22, and I still try to be a better dad every day. But this is talking about the unhealthy pressure, the anxiety that comes with that, right? The pushing yourself to, you have to be better, you have to do more, you have to, have to, have to. That's not healthy. And only a little more than a third, 39% of men believe that they're succeeding as a dad. That should give you pause, because if only 39% of men think that they're succeeding, that means the vast majority don't. And we need men with the confidence to lead confidently. 25% experienced postpartum depression. To be honest with you, before I started preparing for this session, I didn't know postpartum depression in men was a thing. But after I read about it, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And then another almost quarter, 23%, said that they feel isolated, meaning they feel like they're all alone. Whatever they're dealing with, their struggles, maybe it's some of the stuff on the list here, they feel alone, like nobody gets what they're going through. And I think it's important to note that not taking care of yourself impacts how you father. See, all these factors, all these stressors and things that guys are feeling. And we talked about the resistance men sometimes have to taking care of themselves, but we all want to be better dads. And to be a better dad, you need to be a better you. Again, pretty common sense stuff, right? So it comes from taking care of ourselves, and we'll talk about more of that briefly. But if you're not sleeping well, if you got high stress and anxiety, the last thing you should do is exercise less and drink and smoke more, right? That just kind of makes sense. At least it does to me. So we'll get into more of that in a bit. But I can tell you, even from my experience, back when my kids were starting to come around, if you will, I was running 5 days a week and I played basketball 2 or 3 nights a week. And all of that came to a screeching halt. I stopped making time to get out and do those things. It wasn't escaping from the family or shirking my duties. It was just getting a little exercise. And that was something I should have done. So I'll tell you, once you get out of exercise and get back in, is a little bit more tricky. So let's talk about how unhealed abortion experiences can impact fatherhood, because this is an important topic. So a little bit of context. I lost my first child to abortion when I was 18, and my second at 22. I didn't enter abortion healing until I was 39. So that affected my life for 21 years. The abortion experiences, the shame and the guilt and the pain and the loss and the regret and all the things we talk about. But here's the overlap. I entered abortion healing at 39. Well, by then I'd been a dad for 10 years. By the time I was 39, I had 3 kids running around the house. And it impacted how I parented those kids. I didn't have attachment issues, but I did have unrealistic expectations, not of my kids, but of myself. I had to be the perfect dad. Kind of ties in with the other thing, seeking perfection, right? No matter what I did, I never felt like I was good enough. Why? Because somewhere deep inside me, I had all this shame and guilt about allowing my children to be aborted, about not protecting and saving them. I didn't feel like I deserved to be a dad. Again, had no confidence in my ability to be a dad. I was overprotective. I used to make fun of helicopter parents, and then I realized I was one. And the anxiety was constant. And I didn't even become aware of it until many years later. So that was the overlap. That's how it impacted the way I parented. I want to talk about another report from the National Library of Medicine. But before we do that, I want you all to meet Niles. Niles is our newest staff member here at Support After Abortion. And Niles is going to speak to how unhealed abortion experiences can impact fatherhood as well. So Niles, you want to come on and chat with us a bit?
Of course. Me personally, my abortion experience happened after the birth of my first son, actually. My first son was born when I was 19 years old. I was a college athlete going through sports, education, everything like that, still trying to learn how to find myself and become an adult. So a few years later, me and my partner at the time found out she was pregnant, and we talked about it, got a few resources, went to a few clinics, and talked about it amongst ourselves to figure out what was best for ourselves in this situation with the pregnancy. So ultimately, we decided to go through with the abortion, and it was one of those things where I just started to realize that some of these tendencies of being unhealed leads into my relationship with my son. So I had habits of certain things where I felt like I was always letting him down. I felt like I always had to make up for him not having a sibling because he would try to ask me those questions of when can I have a brother or sister, certain things like that. So I felt a sense of maybe a lack of confidence, but also just feeling undeserving of being his dad because I feel like I took that opportunity away from him as well. I was very overprotective in a way. Whenever I took him to the park, it was always one of those things I always watching and making sure I was staying on him, making sure he didn't leave out of my sight, and kind of wanted to be anywhere near him because, like, when you go through an abortion experience, you pretty much lost that child, and that's how my thought process was, and that kind of affected me very differently in a way of I just didn't want to take the chance of losing another child, even if it's not abortion, any kind of way. I just put that wall up as that would never happen to myself again. So those are a few things I realized through my process and working in support after abortion that I need to learn how to become more healthier in my relationship with my son, become heal a little bit more. And I'm still going through my journey as well. I'm talking about these things, but I'm need to go through my journey as well. As I talked about my time starting to support the abortion as a men's healing coordinator, that's something that I've been honored to accept the opportunity to do that, work alongside with Greg and others in the organization. So, if anything, I just feel like this employment for me has been big, as in something I care about, but also healing myself and making that journey in steps I need to take.
Thanks for sharing that, Niles. And I certainly, on behalf of myself and the whole organization, we're excited you're here. And I want you all to think about something for a minute. Niles' story has some overlaps with how he felt and acted and things he thought with mine. We are separated by a little over 2 decades in age and about 800 miles. And what I want you to take away from that, folks, is there are on this slide some truths that a lot of men experience. And a lot of men that you serve experience these feelings that Niles talked about and that I talked about. It's important to be aware of that when you're dealing with these guys because those things are very real. And as a dad, they can consume you. Now, onto that report. I think it's important as we talk about dads and how their mental health, their stress and anxiety, their emotions, their everything impacts the kids' mental health. So in that report, National Library of Medicine, we have this first step. 80% of chronic mental health disorders begin in childhood. Think about that, y'all. 4 in 5 chronic mental health disorders begin in childhood. That's really not new news, maybe, but it is a startling statistic, I think. 25% of US children suffer from at least one chronic health condition. That's a lot. That means 1 in 4 have some kind of chronic condition. And you think about the mental health crisis in this country, you think about kids not being led, and a lot of it is fatherlessness. Dad's gone or not intentional, right? And so that does impact your children. 16%, almost 1 in 5 children in the US are in poor overall health. Think about that for a minute. About 1 in 5 children are in poor overall health, meaning they're set up for failure going into adulthood. And we can change that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. We change that, if you remember the quote at the beginning, by our example. It's important to note, too, that children are 2.5 times more likely to have poor mental health if their fathers have poor mental health. Niles talked about it. I talked about it. That 10 years before I entered healing negatively impacted my children. It absolutely did. That's not a self-deprecation thing. That's not a beat myself up thing. It's just an honest fact. It did. The other side of that is that my healing impacted my children too. We'll get into more of that later. It's also important to note that children are at higher risk of behavioral and emotional difficulties if their fathers experience mental illness. So, what do we get from all of this? Well, what we get from it is if you have mental health issues and you're not working on them, it's impacting your kids negatively. And we need to change that. Fathers who struggle with depression and anxiety feel less effective as parents and more critical of and less consistent in their parenting abilities. So if you have mental illness, if you have mental issues that you're not dealing with, you're going to have more depression and anxiety around parenting, and you're not going to feel like you're doing as good of a job. And that, again, impacts how you parent, which starts a vicious cycle, right? Now, let's start moving in the other direction, because taking care of you does impact how you father. Clarence Buddington Kellen said, "My father didn't tell me how to live. He lived and let me watch him do it." Let's talk about that for a minute. When I started my healing journey at 39, I started getting in touch with those issues I talked about earlier. I started getting in touch with anxiety. I remember talking to a therapist, and he explained to me that I had high functioning anxiety. And the more he explained it, I finally went, "What do you mean? That's not how everybody deals with stuff?" Like, I literally didn't know. It had been my norm for so long, y'all, that I just thought that's how folks dealt with stuff. What an eye opener for me, that when I found out and figured out and realized and saw that getting help for myself changed the way I parented. So I began to be more intentional with my children. I saw that I was a helicopter parent, and I started pulling back, letting go of that fear a little bit. It's okay if they fall while they're riding their bike. It's okay if they fail at something, right? Because failure is what teaches, and all those kind of things that seem automatic to some people. To me, that was the most revolutionary thing ever. Like, I can start backing off. And so it began to change my children too. My healing helped my children. And we talk a lot in this organization about generational trauma. And I've seen that in my life. What I was able to start seeing, though, was generational healing. And that's a beautiful thing, because when you stop the cycle and you start healing, then you can start helping your children heal. And then guess what happens, folks? Healing and talking about things around healing and around recovery and around emotional health, those become part of your natural lexicon in your family. Then your children, hopefully, continue that, right? Then they have children and they teach those things to them. So we've been talking about generational trauma. I just want to encourage you, let's talk about generational healing. And let's talk about some keys to being a healthy dad. So, one of the first things, keep your mind active. Read 20 pages from a book a day. That doesn't seem like a lot, right? And maybe it's not, but you realize if you did that for a year and took weekends off, so 5 days a week, that in the course of a year, you would read between 15 and 20 books. And we know reading 12 books on any subject will make you an expert. You can become an expert at something that you never thought about before in a mere year, just by reading 20 pages a day. A book I read every year in January by a guy named Darren Hardy called The Compound Effect talks about this. And he talks about how small changes over time equal big change. So let's say you want to learn all about 1960 Detroit muscle cars, and you read a book about those, 20 pages a day for a year. You would be an expert at the end of that year. So that's just one example. The second thing is keep your body moving. A lot of us have desk jobs now. It's important to stay active. Now, at my age, in my 50s, active looks a little bit differently than it does for Niles in his 20s, right? I don't go play basketball 3 or 4 nights a week. I don't run 3 to 5 miles a day, but I do stay active. I walk, I exercise, and that's important. You realize if you walk 20 minutes a day, at an average pace, that's about a mile. So 20 minutes a day. Again, you take weekends off. But you do that consistently for a year. You realize in a year's time, you've walked 255 miles intentionally, not including all the walking you do around the office and the house and whatever, right? Again, small changes over time. Third thing is cook more meals. This one, folks, this is huge. And I never knew how huge it was until I started cooking more meals. It was about 3 months ago. I was out of town for business, and I ate out every day for 2.5 days. That's when I realized how truly different it is than cooking your own food. And I don't care what restaurant you go to. Here's a little insight for you. Most of them are supplied by the same food distributors. So you're going to save money and you're going to eat better, I guess is what I'm getting at. And I'm not talking about buying the prepackaged stuff in the grocery store. 90% of the food we sell in the grocery stores 80 years ago, when it didn't exist, because it's not food. Cook more meals, you'll save more money, you'll feel better, and your kids will learn how to cook, and your kids will learn how to eat healthy foods. They won't crave a lot of the junk because they'll find out how good real food actually tastes. The next thing is be sensible about sleeping habits. This was a tough one for me when I was young. Me personally, I need 6, max 7 hours of sleep a night. Any more than that, I'm groggy. Another friend of mine, same age, and he needs 9 or 10 hours a night. So for everybody, it's a little bit different. When I say be sensible about sleeping habits, I'm just saying you know what you need, not what you can get by on, not what you can function on if you have half a pot of coffee. You know what you need sleep wise. So get that every night. Here's another thing. You think, well, I'll burn the candle at both ends all week and I'll catch up on Saturday and Sunday on sleep. No, you won't. You literally can't catch up on sleep. Not like that. So just be sensible. Get the rest you need. And the other thing is, and this is a big thing for dudes, don't be afraid to ask for help or advice. I know a lot of us struggle with it. Kind of goes back to something we talked about last month, right? Guys want help, but they feel like nobody cares. Talk to somebody. Last year, I had a lot of stuff going on. A lot of stuff hit me at once, and I started withdrawing from the people in my circle until we were all on a boat, me and 3 guys that I've known for over 40 years. And I let it all out. And the look of shock and bewilderment on all their faces as they're staring at me. And one of them said, "Why didn't you say anything?" And he was angry. And they busted my chops for not saying anything. And here's the thing, nobody fixed it. Nobody fixed it while we were fishing. But I needed to get it out. I needed to hear somebody else say, "Hey, you know what, man? Sorry you're going through that. I feel your pain," whatever it is. We all need that as men. And when we don't seek it, it impacts not only how we live each day, but also how we parent. Got to talk to other men. The whole time I've been a parent, I talk to other dads, older dads. My dad died a little over 2 years ago. And even at my age, I still wish I could ask my dad questions and his advice. So don't be afraid to ask for help. It's just really that important. Now, we already talked about generational trauma, right? We talked about how generational trauma is learned beliefs, behaviors, and patterns that you pick up from previous generations. And it impacts your relationships, your parenting, your communication, how you see the world, and even your personality. And it also impacts the way individuals understand, cope with, and heal from trauma. We're all going to have stuff happen in our lives. And we're not doing comparatives. Well, this guy's stuff was worse than mine. Mine was worse than him. Nothing like that. We just all have stuff that happens. Generational trauma can impact the way we deal with it, the way we perceive and then deal with the trauma that we experience in life. Again, generational healing, we have the opportunity to change that. When we heal from our abortion wound, changes our parenting, changes the next generation. And so it goes, like we talked about a little bit ago. I share a little story about that and what that looks like. My father grew up in an abusive alcoholic home. Both of his parents were abusive alcoholics, and his mom left when he was 11. My dad left home at 16. A few years later, found himself in Vietnam, in the war, and in the country. Came home, got married, had kids, and became an alcoholic. His turn. My dad got sober, but then mom and dad divorced when I was 6, and my dad remarried quickly, and I didn't see much of my dad till I was about 15. All right. So that for the foundation. Dad had generational trauma that was handed to him, right? Easy to see. Now, my dad wasn't abusive, but he did leave. And so I had issues with my dad. And my dad, when he passed, had 46 years of sobriety, and he had done a lot of recovery work to heal from his childhood wounds. In fact, when he moved back here, I was 15 or 16, my dad said, "You should go to Alateen." And I said, "What's Alateen?" He said, "It's for children of alcoholic parents." He said, "My drinking probably screwed you up, and the meetings would probably help." So I started going. I learned a lot. At 23, I wrote my dad a letter. It was the "where were you? Why'd you let this happen to me?" kind of letter, right? A lot of anger, a lot of pain. My dad, because of his years of healing, folded up the letter when I got done. He was tearing up. Third time, one of 3 times in my life I ever saw him cry. put the letter in his pocket, and he said, "Thank you for sharing that. When you want my response, I'll share it with you." That was powerful. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I showed up at his house. He was out in the barn. I poured myself a cup of coffee because, yes, there was a coffee maker in the barn. And I sat down and I said, "All right, Dad, I'd like to hear your response now." And he shared as openly and honestly with me as I had with him. That healed our relationship. That changed our relationship. And he was one of the closest people in my life from that moment at 23 until he died 2 years ago. My sons only know grandpa. They don't know the man who would fly off at a moment's notice when I was a kid. They don't know the abandonment. They don't know the short temper. They don't know any of that stuff. All they know is a kind, loving, wise grandpa. My dad, for the last 15 years, has lived 5 blocks from me. He was over all the time. And my kids got to experience that. So that's generational healing. And it's beautiful, y'all. And it's painful. It's painful to go through the healing to get to that place. But my children know me as I am and my dad as he is because of healing. And so I want you to remember that. I want you to think about how that can plug into your own healing journey, because taking care of you does impact your children. So let's recap. Again, a better you is a better dad. What do we talk about? We talked about what Father's Day is and shared a couple of funny anecdotes about that and where it came from. We talked about statistics about dads and father absent homes. We encourage you that dads play an important role in raising their children, and they do. We talked about spending pretty money versus spending ugly money on you, not just the house on TV, right? Talked about how becoming a father changes things and how men feel about that, and how unhealed abortion experiences can impact fatherhood and the way you parent. And I shared a little bit about my story, as did Niles. And we talked about dad's mental health impacts his kids' mental health, good and the bad, right? For better or worse. And finally, we encourage you with taking care of yourself and how that can impact your parenting. We talked about some ways to do that, to be a healthy dad, emotionally, physically, mentally. And then we talked about generational trauma and generational healing. My encouragement to you is to not only find the healing for yourself, but the clients that you serve. Be aware of what they're dealing with. Be aware of what they may not have dealt with yet. Be aware of generational trauma and help them make the steps in the right direction.